Chapter 7 is on neocolonialism. Neocolonialism is basically the relationship between countries where one country does not formally colonize another country, but they take advantage of all of their resources with little to no regard for the people who live there. It's kind of like what was practiced in the world before colonies started forming and gaining their own independence. As soon as Latin American countries obtained their independence, they were quickly brought into these relationships with other countries that involved a lot of extraction of resources in exchange for goods and services. But the goods and services often only benefited people in charge, people in leadership roles, um, just people higher up in the government. Governments at this time were more about force than they were about democracy. As a result, much of the benefits would benefit those at the top and the countries doing the extraction as opposed to the countries producing the resources and its people that are there. After the period of time that was colonialism, the world started to move past it. There was still a significant amount of politics associated with the governing and rule of the land in the areas that were once colonies. The chapter also talks about how most of the systems that were in place, including those with social class, essentially remained the same, so there was not much change in the sense. Trade significantly increases, but the benefits were mostly to those of higher ends, like I said before, of the social class. Each country began producing what it was best at, such as coffee in Guatemala and tin in Bolivia. More modern things such as railroads also comes to be in these areas, and all of these associated with the period of neocolonialism. The chapter also talks about the major products that were specialized in each area that were produced. This led to the eventual urbanization of major cities and areas in the communities that we are currently living in today. With the urbanization of some of the major places in Latin America came the development of thinking and social thought. This is when writers began writing their theories and philosophies, and different perspectives began making their way into social thought. Government taxes came from the exports, and so social order also began to develop. But within all of this was also the underlying element of fraud and corruption that was in governments regularly over time. Most people ignored it as normal, but it was a bit more bothersome for others. I believe that that's what led to most of the disorder that came later on. Despite being Republican and for the people, more of these were dictatorships. In the textbook, it discusses some of the experiences, particularly with Diaz in Mexico, as well as the experience that was going on with Brazil. Lastly, in the chapter, it talks about the role of Latin America with the rest of the world and influences from Western culture. Parliament in the United Kingdom, as well as voting rights for the voting right issues, are all elements of outside cultures that have some influence on Latin America. And so it is not too far on its own. This leads to the discussion on the U.S. military interventions that have taken place as early as the 1800s and as late as the 1900s, with many different entities including Nicaragua and Puerto Rico. These events have a major shaping on the formation of Latin America as it is today.
And I will be answering questions 3 and 4. So, question 3 says, explain the U.S. military and commercial interventions in Latin America and name specific countries and situations related to such interventions. So, in this chapter, during this time, they were going through one of the greatest depressions in history to date. This was before the Great Depression. So, because of that, they wanted to begin to export manufactured goods. They created a organization called the U.S. National Association of Manufacturers, where they were searching for markets in Latin America and in Asia. The U.S. also wanted to expand the military, and because they saw European countries acquiring colonies in Africa and Asia, and this was helping out with providing raw materials and capturing markets for competitors. So one of the ideas was to link a canal from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So during the presidential campaign of 1896, the Republican Party, their main focus was to do this canal. They also wanted to take over the Hawaiian Islands and to do an intervention of Cuba. And some of these interventions, it said to name specific countries and situations. Let's see, in 1898, U.S. declared war on Spain and invaded Puerto Rico and Cuba and the Philippine Island. They seized the islands and treated the patriots like criminals. The Platt Amendment also allowed U.S. Marines to intervene in Cuba whenever the U.S. government thought it was necessary, so they can intervene whenever they wanted to, and this lasted for about 35 years. The Philippines were governed directly by the U.S. until the 1940s. The Hawaiian Islands, those were one of the places they wanted to take over during the campaigns. They were taken over by the U.S. in 1898, and this war permanently projected U.S. military power into the Caribbean basin. And President Roosevelt helped to separate Panama from Colombia and then bought canal rights from Panamanian government just a few days later. So question 4 is define oligarchy. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And dictatorship. What are the similarities and differences between the two? And use the life and actions of Porfirio Diaz to illustrate the concept of neo-colonial dictatorship in Mexico. So, oligarchy is a group of families, a group of wealthy and powerful families who basically control everything. Whether it's social or economic influence, they control it, so it's just a group of families. Dictatorship is just one powerful person. So the difference is with oligarchy, it's a group of powerful families coming together for power and control. But dictatorship is just one person. The similarities is they both provided stability, and that's something that you need for foreign trade. So that's one thing that's similar about them. So Porfirio Diaz, they said he was the epitome of neo-colonial dictatorship in Latin America. And the former U.S. Secretary of State actually called him one of the greatest men to be held up for the hero worship of mankind. What he did, he kept up like the constitutional appearances, as far as like elections, he made it appear as though he was playing fair. But really he wasn't, because all of his candidates always won the elections. So, he put on that facade, like he was playing fair, but he wasn't, pretty much. Some of the things that he did, he curbed regional caudillos by crushing them or buying them off. He created jobs for middle-class townspeople by vastly enlarging bureaucracy. He subsidized the press to keep it friendly, but he also jailed the people who stood up against him. So if you were against him, then you didn't have a say-so. Like as far as being a journalist, you didn't have a say-so. And he also was the one that defeated the French in the Cinco de Mayo. I'm sure everybody knows about that. All right, so that's it. As far as the self-examination, the way me and Jihad Barbee kept in contact with each other was through course messages. We exchanged numbers. We discussed who was going to do which questions. We discussed how we were going to do the video. So he agreed to do questions 1 and 2, and I did 3 and 4. So once he did his video, he sent his video to me. I'm doing my video, and I just put it all together. As far as it overall, well, this isn't the case for my group, for me and Jihad, but I would think it may be a little difficult for other people to get together to do this oral presentation, being that it's a online class. It's and we don't know where our classmates are. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know what kind of life they're living. So it may be kind of hard to get in contact with them, to come together on this oral presentation.